Hello, everybody. I want to welcome today Joél Simone Anthony. So Joél is a licensed funeral director and a sacred death and grief care practitioner in Atlanta, Georgia, right?
Yes.
Okay. And Joél has a wonderful website you can find her at. It's called thegravewoman.com. And it has a lot of information about death and grief and even how to become a funeral director, right? I
Yes.
love it. I love it. So, and so in fact, the title of her website is Let's Talk About Death. And Joél also has a grief kit, which I found to be amazing because it's got sage and crystals, all things dear to my shamanic heart. And I think Joél is a shaman at heart herself. And she also has a book, and it's called A Spiritual Approach to Loss, Nature, Ancient Wisdom, and Spiritual Tools. Amazing. So we're going to put all that up so that you guys can order it all and contact Joél and all those good things. And so here we are. I met Joél because I took a course from Joél, and it's called Racism and Death Care. And I was so amazed by the course, and so it just opened my eyes and blew me away. And I love Joél, and I just love her presence and her knowledge and wisdom, and she's like fearless. She's like this fearless woman. And I thought, oh, I wonder if she would come on and talk to me. I wonder if I could interview her. So she's graciously accepted, and I'm so honored to have you here. And I know there's so much information that people just don't know about that subject. Death has become sort of a taboo subject in and of itself. And then on top of it now, we have the death of George Floyd and the impact of all that. And the fact that his death actually opened up many discussions about racism. And so, you and I have this subject of grief and death care, and somebody just called me the grief woman. So you and I are like when grave woman and the grief woman get together.
Right. I love that.
This is what we get. This is what we get. So, so what are your feelings about the impact of the death of George Floyd and the discussions about race?
Honestly, Karen, I think that the impact of George Floyd's death was like in the universal cards.
Mm.
Especially happening now in 2020. There's a lot of twin synergy. He was killed in the Twin Cities. His daughter's name is Gianna, just like Kobe Bryant's daughter's name was Gianna. And I think that energy and that vibration of two has a lot for changing our vision. As far as the way that the world views, or especially here in America, we view race and the grief and suffering of Black people in this country, not just today, but historically. I think that his death, I've heard when I didn't watch the entire video, I couldn't watch it, but I heard he was calling out for his mother. And I feel as if maybe when he did, that released something from the ancestral and spirit realm into our realm and created a shockwave that opened everyone's eyes, again, with that twin energy and that two energy. So as far as racism in this country, racism isn't new.
No.
It's now being recorded and put on the mainstream news. And I think that it's opening the eyes of people who were under the illusion that it didn't exist because of their privilege and personal bias.
Yes, right. And I talked in one of my videos before about how we acquiesce and collude in things. Sometimes we think, oh, I don't want to get into it. I don't want to step up. Oh, I don't want to. And I know you've had experiences like that too, where people just didn't step up for you. And so it's that business of just colluding and acquiescing and going along. All of that seems to be shaken up. People are not so willing.
Right.
And I don't think it has to do with the fact that things are just being recorded now that weren't 20 years ago.
Right. And I think that's even something because, of course, technology is amazing, but I think a lot of times we get caught in the physicality of our realm. But what a recording does is it makes it real again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
100 years now, that video is going to be just as powerful as it was the first time it was viewed. I also think that I'm trying to think about how I can say this. I think that George Floyd's death was necessary, but I don't want to use the word necessary because no one should have to die like that because of if he was a white man, would it have happened that way?
Who knows? I mean, but the fact is it happened to him, and
Right.
it happened the way it did on his neck, which has a particular significance, with all lynchings and historical things, and that the his murderer was looking right in the camera, like with such an evil face, like, yeah, what are you gonna do? I'm killing them, right? Wow.
It's deep. And I didn't even think about the lynching. I thought about the voice.
The
But
voice,
what you said just now about the lynching, that's a whole nother level.
the whole
So,
nother. Oh,
yeah.
yeah. I think there's just so many levels to it, and I think that's why people are responding in such a big way.
Yes.
So, I mean, I say I've been dealing with this. I'm 66, so I've been around this issue for years and years and years, and it sort of raises its heads and it goes. And Martin Luther King, and there's so many different times this has come up in a big way and then kind of settled in. But this time, I don't know, it's different. I feel like it's different.
Right.
I feel like it's different. And, I think it's like, playing it over and over again, like you said, just brings it back and brings it back. And there's no his word against mine. It's right there. It's right. Right. You can't deny it. It's right there.
And it's not just him. I mean, the countless others.
Oh, the
The
countless.
young men from Colorado, the young men here from Georgia, the woman, Breonna Taylor, those people are still running around free that killed her. It's not just George Floyd, but there was something about his death that changed everything.
Yeah.
Glad it did. However, I honestly am a little bit afraid. As we know, things tend to get better before they get worse. Get worse before they get better.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people are angry, and a lot of that energy and that hatred that still resides in people, whether it's from spiritual lineage or just personal beliefs, I think is starting to bubble up. And that makes me, as a person walking around in a Black body, it makes me proud and uncomfortable at the same time.
At the same time. Yeah.
Optimistic and very afraid.
Yeah. 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 I wish I could be walking right there with you, right there beside you. Whew. So, yeah, this is such a big subject. And and part of it is, in our little bailiwick of grief and death, how can we be the best? How can I be the best shamanic practitioner? I do a lot of work transitioning souls and working with grieving families. And I want to be, how can I be the best practitioner that I can be? And for those who don't know you, I'd love to have you share your journey with us a little bit. How was it to be a Black woman in a field dominated by white men?
When I first started out, I started out working in a cemetery, and I was blessed to work with both Black and white people that were very passionate about service. Things didn't change for me, and I didn't realize how segregated the industry was until after I'd finished mortuary school and started working for a corporation with predominantly white men, or predominantly white male in leadership and colleagues, right? So I've had situations where I've gone out on removals and coroners or medical examining techs wouldn't release bodies to me because I was Black in a white county. white county. And for some reason, I don't know if they thought I was just joyriding with a hearse or a removal van, but I've seen people go to the same counter, not be asked for IDs or to call the funeral home to confirm your employment or to just do ridiculous things to prove that they were working for a funeral home and had reason to take custody of a body. I've had families that have requested not to make arrangement conferences with me because I'm Black, you know. As a woman, I feel like it's empowered me because most of the time, or in the past, most of the time, I would be the only female. And I think that made me just more nurturing. So people would, you know, come to me more so than they would to the white males in some instances, but then that would create animosity from them behind the scenes. Especially living here in the South in Georgia. You look like you wanted to ask another question.
Well, I was just going to say that whole business about credentialing, over-credentialing, over-checking, that's humiliating in and of itself.
I wouldn't use the word humiliating because I know my credentials. You know, I'm very confident in my skills and my capabilities, but it just honestly pissed me off.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a waste of my time. I have other shit to do. Like, I don't have time to go back and forth with you right now.
See, this is why I love you. I love this is it. Yeah, let's get down to the fact that it just pisses you off. You know, it's like enough is enough. Yeah, I love that. And what about so what about your journey as a sacred death and grief care practitioner? So that's a little like expanding on the funeral director role.
And honestly, like I told you a few days ago when we were talking about this interview, that's something that wording was revealed to me about a month ago. And as I explained, I'm from Beaufort, South Carolina, which is the home of the Gullah and Geechee culture. And I honestly did not realize that the way we deal with death in my hometown is so much different than the way that people deal with death in other parts of the United States or in parts of the world until I started working in the funeral service industry. Back home, it's all about the communal and the family and just everyone being a part of the process. Children aren't kept out of arrangement conferences and, you know, viewings and things like that. And seeing that was something that was normalized outside of my hometown was very strange for me. And a lot of what we practice and do back home is based in a lot of original African practices because of the cultural significance of the area that I'm from. So that wording was revealed to me. And as I said on my website, death and grief are sacred, and they give us the opportunity to tap into energies that are transformative to us as human beings. So that's my direction to help us as practitioners tap into that journey, because a lot of times the funeral service and the burial is the end of the journey for the funeral director. And in my case, that's the beginning.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. And I, you know, I was thinking about, you're talking about that, we've gotten so far away from the body, the deceased.
Yeah.
Right. I was thinking about my son. When my son passed, of course, I wasn't on this path. And at that time, and I had to literally fight the funeral director and other people. I just wanted to touch him one last time. And it was like, pulling me away, and I was ready to fight people. I was like, so it just is like, no, that's just not done. You step back, you just look, and then we haul him off. And, I don't know how we got so disenfranchised about death, and how death became such a taboo subject, and grief, my gosh, it's become, it's time to get over it, time to move on. And it's crazy. It's all crazy. Yeah.
We're taught in school that our society is very youth driven. So anything that contradicts or conflicts the ideal of youth and beauty and just perfection has been almost removed. And if you think about it, it's kind of true. Think about gentrification, or even historical areas be gentrified, which is mind-blowing to me, but it's like about the new look and keeping up with the time. So I think that plays a part of it. But I also think that we don't, as a whole, want to deal with our emotions that surround death and loss, because it makes you very insecure and vulnerable. And if you're not introspective, you can be lost, which is completely natural.
Right. Totally. And I think we overlook something so important, is the wisdom that comes out of the grieving process.
Yes.
You know, we realize about the joys of marriage and and motherhood or fatherhood, all those things, but grieving, we've cut ourselves off, and it is also transformational and life-changing. And so we just cut it off. It's like, and then so people are left sort of trying to flounder around on their own and wondering why they can't get over it. And it's a journey. It's not something you get over. It's something that is a continuing process. And if you allow yourself to feel it and go through it and get the wisdom out of it and the lessons and the journey, I think people wouldn't feel so lost and isolated.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. And I love you were talking about beauty and death. And you were talking a little bit with me about how making up Black women, people, hair, all of that is different and special. And yeah. And talk a little bit about that, if you would. And sacred hair. I love the sacred hair.
So I have a class entitled Cultural Competency, Black Hair and Skincare for Non-Ethnic Death Care Professionals. And I created that class because in my time in the industry, I've seen that especially white people are almost afraid or intimidated by our hair, because you just don't know what to do with it, because you're not taught about it. You've never seen it before in your life. You've never had to manage it. And it's not like your hair. I always tell the story about being a funeral apprentice and walking into a funeral home, embalming room, and seeing a white male funeral director cut a woman's braids from her scalp, not realizing that there was weave in her braids that was covering her hair. Her hair and the weave were, braided together. And had he continued, she would have been completely bald. And having to explain that to the family, on top of the fact that it was done by someone who's supposed to be a professional at this, I mean, it could have been a disaster. Luckily, he had only cut out a little bit out of the nape, and I was able to correct him and, lead him in the correct direction. But our hair is just so much more than hair. It tells a story. It was used to express our status in the community when we were in Africa, and even now. It can be used to express marital status. It can to express religious affiliation and affiliations of all kinds. So I just think that as a death care professional, having working knowledge of the significance of our hair and a basic knowledge, you don't have to know how to do braids and ponytails and twist outs and all of those styles, but just knowing the correct shampoos to use, knowing that our hair shrinks when it comes in contact with moisture, knowing that our hair it can range from as fine as yours to as kinky curly as Jesus's hair was supposedly to have been. So just educating death care professionals is a huge passion of mine about our hair.
I love it.
Did you know anything specific about our hair?
Pardon me? Did I? Oh, I just think the whole subject is fascinating. That I think it's knowing that there's differences. And I love that you said something about shining the light, or concept of an icebreaker. So yeah, talking about things. I mean, I just think that it's awareness. So if you're aware, you just don't go in and start cutting somebody's hair. You go, oh, I better check on this. Oh, it might be an issue. Maybe I should ask somebody. And so you're the perfect person. I would love to have everybody that has a question go to the grave woman, go to Joél, and ask these kind of questions. Come on, she's ready.
Yeah, and I think like icebreakers in that situation would look like asking the family. I think, again, being afraid to admit that we don't know, or assuming that we're not responsible for because it's something we've never encountered before or even had to be responsible for. So just, there's nothing wrong with saying to a family, or in that case, it would have been nothing wrong with him saying to me, I've never seen this before. What in the world do I do with this? Or saying to the family, you know, I noticed that her hair, you said you wanted her hair a specific way. I think the family wanted her hair, her natural hair, to be out for the service and for her final viewing. They had no idea what that meant. So they're just thinking, let me get this off. That was his terminology, off. And he felt so bad when I explained it to him. So it wasn't anything intentional or malice, but just saying, I don't know what that means. Is there someone who did her hair on a regular basis that can come in and assist us?
Yeah.
That was such a bond of trust with the family, because it says that you care and you want to get it right, but it's our fear and that bias,
Right.
that implicit bias in the back of our minds that says, oh, it's just like mine, or I don't know, whatever I do, it's going to work, you know?
Right. Oh, I love that. That big, what did you call it? A bond of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And also you mentioned about if you walk in as a white person and somebody's in the process of dying and you're trying to be a death doula or a shaman or whatever your role is, and you just walk in like, hey, here I am, and don't address the fact that, hey, historically we might have had issues, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I want
Right.
your family to know I'm here for you. I want you to know. I want to be able to hold your hand, and I want to be able to, be here in whatever way you need me. And
Right.
that discussion, it's kind of icky.
It can be uncomfortable, but I think I can see how it can be uncomfortable from your perspective.
No,
For
I mean,
me,
if you don't have that discussion, it's kind
right.
of,
If you don't have it, it just is kind of like, doing here? Like, why are you here? You know?
yeah.
Especially if you're in a situation where maybe the next of kin knows that you're a part of the process, but other family members may not. It's like, what is this?
Right. It's sort of like, my criminal law professor always talked about, not one to talk about things like, what elephant in the room, like, what whiteness in the room? What are you doing here? Why are you here? And just addressing it. To have that, yeah.
I think it's of course it's death doulas. I feel like death doulas are the best. They're very aware of the sacredness of transition. That's why they're death doulas.
Yeah.
But I feel like, especially when working with Black and brown families or people of color, just saying, I may not understand, but how can I support? What can I learn prior to coming?
Yeah.
How can I be of service in this moment to make it as peaceful for you? I mean, you don't necessarily have to address the white and the Black, because that's the last thing the family's worried about. They don't care who you are. It's just, don't come in uncomfortable and tense and hold on to it. Do what you can to relieve and break that up, you know?
Yeah. Oh, I love it. That is such good advice. Such good advice. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about disenfranchised death. You had talked about that. So my son died of a heroin overdose.
Right.
So I'm very conscious of disenfranchised death, because in my community, it was very much looked down on. And it was sort of like, oh, well, what did you do wrong? Clearly you were submissive, or you weren't watching, or blah, 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 whatever. So yeah, and that happens a lot in every community, but I like your take on it.
It differs depending on situations. Abortion, I have a video on my YouTube channel about abortion, and how people who have had abortions or made the decision that abortion was the best choice for their family, they don't have the opportunity to grieve the same way that someone whose child dies in a car accident or passes away from cancer does. And then there's the guilt and the shame that kind of keeps them in self-isolation.
Mm-hmm.
As far as race is related, Black people, our experience seeing George Floyd killed is so much different from yours, you know, or seeing Black people killed or on the news, or even the crime scenes. The way that the news anchors describe Black victims versus white victims is it's a broad difference. And it almost takes away from the fact that this person is human, you know. This could be your child. How would you want this person described? There's a young lady named Alicia Fournette who talks a lot about being Black and grieving in the workplace. You know, maybe your mom didn't die, but you just saw someone murdered on TV that looks like your brother or your uncle or your husband, someone that you love. The woman, Anita Pollard Grant, who co-hosted the class with me, she would be a good person to talk to about disenfranchised grief, because she actually is a behavioral health. She has some type of behavioral health education, and she's also funeral director. But we were making a list of types of disenfranchised grief, and we both were just amazed about how many types there could be, you know. I think it's important to define disenfranchised grief for those who may not know, because it was honestly a term I had never heard prior to the racism class. And it basically means that your grief is not acknowledged in society the way that another grief may be. People that passed away from AIDS in the 80s.
Yes.
You know, it's just, I feel as if disenfranchised grief takes away the opportunity to receive the communal and the love that everyone should be surrounded by when someone passes away, despite their circumstances. Another big one is suicide.
Yes.
You know, so
yeah.
I hope that answers the question. I felt like I rambled for like 10 minutes right there.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. And then complicated grief too. That was, you had broken these things out, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so important.
Yeah, there's like, if you Google types of grief, there's a website that'll pop up. I think it's the second website. There's like 30 different types of grief.
Wow.
And when we think of grief, we just think of, oh, someone died or whatever, but it could be from losing a job. It can be secondary loss from, you know, someone did die, but then I got a divorce. You know, divorce, you know, there's just so many types of grief. And I think that honestly, we're all grieving something, even if it's the perception of the world we thought we lived in prior to COVID.
Yes. And how many people are having to deal with COVID deaths, going into the hospital alone, and, and the family not being able to be there. So the family, the individuals alone, maybe they didn't make it. Or maybe they came out very compromised, job loss, everything that's going on is just a lot of grieving.
Can you imagine how terrifying it must be for your family member to tell you they don't feel well and they're going to the hospital and then you don't hear anything else? And maybe they didn't die. Maybe their phone died, you know, or maybe there's not a signal in the hospital. That level of anxiety and grief in itself, the grief that, like, in your mind, like, what is going on, you know? I can't, it's crazy.
It's crazy. And even, you know, the ICU unit, if they're in the ICU, they, you know, those nurses are, and everybody's busy. So it's not like, how are they doing? You know, they don't always have time to tell you. And it can be too late, you know, it can be, well, they passed. Can you imagine? I mean, there's going to be a lot of fallout from this forever.
There is, psychologically. I just don't know what we're going to look like 20 years from now, especially those that have had losses due to COVID.
Yeah, exactly. And then you also had some concepts that I love too, that you can unpack a little bit: implicit bias, conformity bias, and explicit bias. It just blew my mind. I love the breakout. I just love it.
So a bias can be anything. It could be hair color. It could be your preference of flower. But in the case that we're talking about, of course, it deals with race, from the racism course. So an implicit bias is a bias that you maybe are not even aware that you have. Like, maybe I feel a certain way about white people because of what I was taught growing up. I'll give you the perfect example. I was always taught growing up that because I was Black and because I was a woman, I had to be 3 times smarter, I had to be 3 times more well-behaved, and I had to be 3 times more prepared than my white counterparts. I do not think that that is a conversation that white parents have with their children about Black people.
You're right.
And
You're right.
because of that, for a long time, I was in this internal competitive struggle that I didn't understand why I had, you know? Or the opposite of that is an explicit bias, where you know you don't like white people, or you prefer not to deal with white people, and you're aware of it, and you still choose, regardless of how nice a person is to you, how kind they've been to you, how much of their heart and their spirit they've shown you to be genuine, you still choose not to like or treat that person differently because they're white or Black, you know? Complicit bias would be being complicit with your ignorance. You know, a lot of times, specifically white people are just ignorant of certain things. And I don't mean ignorant as a negative word. You just don't know about our culture, like the hair. You don't know about our hair. But instead of saying, let me take accountability, there's a course available, or there's someone here I can ask questions, I'm just going to leave it for her to do. You're complicit.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Wow. Yes, that is so big. I just love it. I mean, it just breaks it out so nicely. Yeah, sometimes you're not aware. And then I was in another class dealing with race and said, well, how could you not be aware? Oh, yeah.
It's not your.
What don't you want to see? How could you not know that, you know, Black people are suffering or whatever, that this is really hard and this is hard conversations. And, you know, every time a Black young man starts to drive a car, they have the conversation about how to deal with the police if they get stopped.
Right.
I didn't have to have that conversation with my kids. Never occurred to me.
Right.
So what a huge difference, you know, and yeah.
And I works both ways. I don't think that only white people are ignorant. I think Black people are ignorant too. But the difference is that it could our ignorance could literally cost us our life in the wrong circle. Watched a video on Instagram where a young white woman was talking about how when she and her friends used to party and smoke pot, I mean, it's pot, you know, if the police came around, they'd all give the blunts and the joints and the pipes and everything to her. And she never understood why until one of her friends asked her, well, did they search you? They searched everyone else that was Black or Mexican, but did they search you?
Wow.
And started to understand her privilege just because she had white skin.
Yes. Oh, that really puts it right down there, doesn't it? Sometimes you just need that moment. It's like that Oprah calls that aha moment where you just go, oh my God.
Right. And even like with Oprah, I love Oprah Winfrey. Like, I'm a huge fan. She's like, like I'm trying to manifest her. Right?
Yeah, right.
But a lot of women, especially white women, gravitate towards her because she fits more into what you all think a Black woman should be. There's several women that have Oprah's same message, her same energy, her same, not necessarily the resources, but are doing similar things. Why is Oprah as opposed to someone else? You know, that bias.
Yeah, she's got that cross-cultural smooth.
Right. Which is beautiful. I'm not saying anything negative.
No, I get you though.
Yeah. It's the messenger, you know, and that messenger fits into some people's biases. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So, you know, you get into that thing about the angry Black woman.
Right.
So then, you know, it's like, oh, that's the angry Black woman. Got to run from that. Got to hide from that. Let's not listen, for goodness sake.
Ask, why is she angry?
Is she angry?
Why crying? Why, what has hurt you? Why does it just have to be stay away from that?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Why is she angry? And that's honestly something I struggled with. And I don't know if you participated in the Saying It Louder that Alua author did. If you haven't,
I couldn't fit that one in. That looks really good though.
If you subscribe on her website or on the link, I'll send it to you. You can listen to it. But that was one of the points I made in the conversation. I struggled because I didn't want to be the Black woman, the angry Black woman. And that wasn't being true to what I was feeling and experiencing. It's like, why the hell should I not express myself because I'm afraid of offending you? And when I say you, I mean just, you know, everything that represents racism in a white person or represents privilege or ignorance and bias. Why should I not express what I'm feeling or speak up or
tone it down?
Why I have to alter myself to not seem angry to you? I'm pissed off.
Yeah.
You know? So being in that community, that space.
I wanted you. I wanted to talk to you because I love this. I love this fearlessness and truth, you know, and not burying it and pretending it's not there. You know, it's like, it's real. You know, this is anger.
And that it's been a journey to get to this point because I always have not been this way, you know, and yeah, we can go on for days about that. But I made the choice. I'm not doing that anymore. It's not real.
No.
It's not truth, you know? Mm-hmm. And I'd rather speak the truth than to conform for money or whatever comes with not doing that.
Yeah.
It's not fair. Especially that's what George Floyd and all of these murders and everything has done personally within me.
Yeah.
Affected you?
Pardon me?
How have you asked me about George Floyd and how I thought it affected death care and, you know, us as professionals and, you know, the topic of racism. How has it affected you?
Oh, horrifying and shameful and shocking. And I keep I have on my website, Black Lives Matter. I put it everywhere in every posting that I have. And somebody said, well, you know, that happened a little bit ago, or isn't that past? I'm like, I'm not past it. I'm not going to get past it this time. I am not. I mean, I've been seeing this for too long. And I was in another group and they talk about trust. And so how do we trust each other, really? You know, trust each other that like a partner, that you have my back. And you have my back even when I'm not around. Ooh, how about that? Right? So, yeah, so for me, it's just reaching out. So I've been taking as many, you know, your class and other classes and as many things as I can take, and Oprah's program, and just continuing the dialogue with as many people as I can get to dialogue back with me, you know, as many people as I can find. And, you know, I don't know, I love talking to Black women because the Black women that I know, if you give them a minute, and you give them just a little bit of time to show that you're not, you know, that you really want to know, they're going to tell you the way things are, right? They're going to say it. And we don't have this, it's not that I don't like Black men, it's just that women can talk in a different way. And I think sometimes we can just cross-culturally talk to each other. And, you know, maybe it's time for women to take their place in this old patriarchy.
I definitely feel that that's what 2020 is. I don't want to sound crazy, but I heard it described as Gaia and the feminine energy return. You know, but I think a lot of things that have plagued masculine energy, such as ego and insecurity and overcompensation and toxic masculinity, I really think that veil was shredded or torn down when Kobe Bryant died. Sitting here with my partner and watching him cry like a baby, you know, I mean, it was tragic, especially with his daughter passing away. But the reaction totally shocked me. And even the men on ESPN, you've never seen men openly express themselves like that before.
Yeah.
All at once, especially not Black men. So I think, I don't want to say that feminine energy is taking over, but I definitely believe that it's being rebalanced. And I think that's the only way we can move forward in conversation, because you mentioned trust. Trust isn't going to happen because you have a Black Lives Matter sign in your yard or on your website.
No.
That says nothing, you know. Yeah, I know they matter. What's next?
What's next? Yes. What's next? You know,
I don't know. And that's what I've really been trying to meditate on and trying to get silent about, is how do I build trust with not just white people, but people in general, especially around the topic of death and grief. Because if we're honest, we're going to see a lot of it in the next few months. And with the work that both you and I do, getting someone to open up and really dig deep, not like we're mental health professionals, but just what it is that you're feeling about this loss in particular, there has to be a level of trust there. And all of my clients aren't going to look like me or think like me or talk like me, you know? Right. So how do I build that trust? And I honestly don't know the answer.
The only thing that comes to me is something a dear friend of mine always says, we all have our own little piece of the puzzle. And so you and I, we're doing death and grief. And so the best we can do is reach out the best way we can, you know, cross-culturally, cross boundaries, cross in our little bailiwick. You know, it's like, I'm not Martin Luther King or Mahatma Gandhi. I'm not that big person, but I have my little thing. So I can talk to you and I can refer people to you. Say, hey, ask her. She'll tell you exactly what to do and how to do it. And, you know, you can refer to me back and forth and we can talk like this about what we know. And that's all I know to do. I just don't know how to do more, except keep talking and keep joining groups and keep the discussion alive.
Right. And I think it requires a certain level of vulnerability as well. I think that's a big part of it, because honestly, after the course, both Anita and myself had an influx of emails, and everybody wants to talk and everybody wants to invite you to this or that or this or that. And that's wonderful. That's what we've been working for and towards. But is it because, do you want to talk because it's the hot topic now? Or do you want to talk because you're sincerely genuine about learning and like trying to make change within yourself? Not because you're a bad person, but because you just maybe didn't know, or are you guilty? You know what I mean? So that's kind of what I'm struggling with, honestly, is trying to get rid of that bias and level of ego, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's not ego. I don't know.
Well, I think it has everything to do with trust. Like, is this the new fad of the moment? And like I said, I've been around for many years with this, and I've seen it come and go, raise and lower, raise and lower. And so, you know, in this time, I want to use my resources and I want to use my energy the best way I can, and keep the discussion alive. Like I said, I'm not done with it. I don't care if anybody's done with it. I'm not done with this, you know, and that's all I can say. And then, you know, reach out to you and say, oh my gosh, she's amazing. She's fearless and brilliant, and you know, all these things that I admire so much. And, you know, start the dialogue, just dialogue.
Yeah. And I appreciate your vulnerability. And like, honestly, when we talked last week, I didn't know if I was going to agree. But then after talking to you and listening to you and listening to your experiences and then listening to your story about your son, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm talking to her. Yeah. But I really appreciate your vulnerability and willingness to participate in this conversation as a white woman, because a lot of people are afraid to. They may feel a certain way, but they're not speaking up about it because it challenges their group, their social groups, you know, or their family, you know.
Well, I thought that too. I thought, well, she may say no, and she may say no after she talks to me, but that's her right. she might just say no. And, that's it. That's okay too. It wouldn't be great. It would hurt my heart, but especially after I talk to you. But that was, that's your right. And, are we going to do this thing? Are we going to, reach out and have this little bit of a discussion and see what we can do in our own little worlds? And you've talked about, I think, the Gullah and Geechee culture that you come from and how it deals a lot with the ancestors. And I was talking about ancestors, and you're like, I don't think I ever heard a white woman talk about ancestors before.
Yeah.
So,
I've never heard it. Like, we have this place called the African Village. It's in Sheldon, South Carolina. And I mean, white folks come out there and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to stay for a month and participate in these ceremonies and, just spend time with this group of people who run this village, right? And it has always been the weirdest thing to me, because I'm like, when you go home, are you wearing a dashiki? And
right.
So what's the point? What's the point? But when I heard you say that, that was the most authentic representation of what I know to be my culture that I've ever seen in a white person. And it just let me know that spirit is universal.
Spirit is universal. Yeah. And maybe that's what we have to hang on to. Maybe it's that, spirit is universal. And if we can just, instead of be separate, like realize, whoa, we are in spirit, always. And just keep it open, keep it talking. So anything else you want to add in or talk about? I hate to let you go. I don't want to let you go.
Not really. I want to ask you, because I know you read the book, right?
Yeah.
My goal, and if you want to edit this out, this is fine. But my goal with the book is that someone who doesn't even have the kit can pick it up and get something from it.
Oh, yeah.
So being that you didn't have the kit, but you read the book, did you take something away that maybe you didn't know or hadn't thought about, or a perspective?
Oh, yeah. I love the way you have it like focused toward grief, like the chakras and like what each one represents. And, it just was really focused and it was logical and it went through it. And I thought, oh my gosh, somebody could read that and say, okay, I'm feeling a little less like I'm hemmed in, like I don't know what's happening to me. And I think that's a lot of times when people are in deep grief, they just don't understand what's happening, and people are saying time to move on. Let's not talk about this. Let's do something. And they're stuck. They can't. So that idea of moving energy and the chakras and looking at grief is so important, I think. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So yeah, so I'd love to have that, I'll put that in the little banner,
Okay.
your website and everything. Cause it's, so I teach, and the classes are cross-cultural. There's all kind of Black people and brown people and out people. And so they're going to totally resonate with you. And I think that would be great to look at your website too. And what do they need? Or maybe they just want to talk to you. When they have someone who crosses over, or if they're in deep griefs and they don't want to talk to me, they want to talk to you. You know what I mean? They want somebody that looks more like them, or at least in the beginning. Because when you're raw, when your emotions are raw, the last thing you really, and I think we kind of touched on this, the last thing you want is somebody jangling your nerves. Like, oh gosh, now I have to deal with this whiteness in the room when I can barely keep it together. Or I don't want to deal with this Blackness in the room. I have to worry about what they're going to think. And I just barely keeping it together. So, and that's okay. So I can send somebody to you. So would you like to talk to her? She's really good and she'll help you.
Definitely. I do consultations, and a part of the grief kit is actually, I have consultations tied to that where we work through the book and the kit together. So
is that on your site too?
Because
consultations?
On the grief kit tab, if you go to the site and then click on the grief kit, it'll say like, read the book, book a consultation, buy the kit. So yeah.
Okay, I missed the consultation part. So maybe, I don't know, put it like somewhere up front in your website so people can know that you consult. Yeah, because a lot of times people just need to talk to somebody, right? I didn't have anybody to talk to. I just didn't have anybody to talk to. I wasn't religious. I'm an only child of an only child. My mother had passed. I had one daughter and one son, and I was divorced. I had nobody, friends, but they can't help you through that, you know. And I just ended up retiring. I mean, I had a lifetime appointment. I retired, sold everything, went on the road for 2.5 years. I just was a mess. You know, I just didn't have that person. So just somebody to have somebody like you know, that they can talk to, somebody, you know, or somebody like me, you know, that's, you can just have a conversation with it. They'll say, I get it.
Right. How did you begin your journey to shamanism? Like, I mean, I know it was catapulted by your son's death, but what started it? Did you read a book? Did you have a conversation? Did you overhear something?
Oh, I actually had an appointment right after my son died. I felt him and I saw him. I think we talked a little bit about that. And so I ended up going to a medium. I'm like, I feel him and see him, but I can't hear what he's saying. Can you tell me what he's saying? And so we had a long thing. And then she said, wow, you might have some skills yourself. Most people can't see their
Right.
part. And so I worked a lot with her. And then she said, you ought to get an appointment with this guy, Paul D. Nunn. He's an evolutionary astrologer. Okay. So, okay, what's that? So I thought I'd try it, right? And so he told me basically that my soul, I came in like with blame, shame, and guilt and all this other stuff. My soul had chosen a mystical path. And I'm like, I don't know what that, I'm like, what is a mystical path? And then he's like, and I had did another reading for somebody like you that became a shaman. And I'm like, I thought shamans died out hundreds of years ago. I mean, I was totally had no clueless, right? And so then of course, I Google, because that's what I do. I Google everything. And the Four Winds came up, and I called and talked to somebody. And 3 weeks later, I was in a plane to California for a course, thinking, oh, you have to be crazy. You're too old, and there's not gonna be anybody like you, and they're gonna all be, you know, touchy-feely types, and they're not gonna get you, and blah, blah, blah. And then I drank the Kool-Aid. You know, I drank the Kool-Aid. And then I just kept traveling and then that was the beginning of my decision. I sold everything and I began traveling. I went to Africa, I went to Asia, I went, you know, tried to hit every continent and work with shamans and spiritual people. And then I've kind of got this journey through grief, you know, that's in my book. It was sort of downloaded to me. It just all came together, as above, so below. And the journey of the bereaved and the journey of the deceased is transformation, resurrection, and rebirth. And we know this with Jesus, and we know this in Egyptian cultures and African cultures. I mean, it's that same journey, the transformation out of the physical body into the spiritual, resurrection, into the spiritual place. And then you have a rebirth, you know, so Jesus sat at the hand of God the Father, and Osiris became the Lord of, so, you know, it's sort of like that journey. And so the bereaved go through this too. Transformation from not being bereaved, from this person being your life to not being your life. And then bit by bit, you know, into resurrection. You drop some of the heaviness and some of the stories and the guilt and the shame and the blame and all that, and then you get to resurrection. You start seeing possibilities. Maybe I can find a life. Maybe I can have a life, right? And then finally, like rebirth, and you take all that energy of grief. I mean, it really has transformational energy and the wisdom, and you create something new. So for me, I created this whole new person, you know, shaman and writer and all these kind of things that, you know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, weren't even on my horizon.
Wow. And see, that's so interesting because a lot of people focus on the 5 stages of grief, right?
Yeah.
But then there's this, I think 7, and that 7th is the reinvestment of energy. And that's when you were talking, that's what I was hearing. Literally reinvestment of energy to the new resurrection and rebirth. I've never thought like that.
Yeah, so that guy that writes with Kubler-Ross, I can't think of what his name is at the moment, but he wrote his last book was the last stage of, you know, the 5 stages of grief, and then the last stage is finding meaning. So, I mean, I think that everybody's kind of gets to that, is like, you go through all this, and then if you're lucky, if you're one of the lucky ones, you find meaning. And if you're not, just rolling around in the belly of the whale, lost.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So, oof. Well, I sure enjoyed talking with you. Thank you so much. And thank you for not giving up on me. And let's keep in touch.
Yes,
sure.
please.
Yeah. And actually, I was going to ask you something to consider. You don't have to answer today, but something I thought was, I would love, so there's this thing now that Hay House does, and it really talks about getting someone of color to read what you're writing to see how it goes over and if you've really screwed up. So I have like, I'm going to have 16 videos, and I thought I would offer to pay you if you would just look at the videos and tell me, like, from it makes your eyes roll back in your head to steam coming out of your ear, if something, you know, and that way I can, you know, maybe change even in the book, right? Because I want it to appeal to everybody. So I was thinking they're about 8 minutes long, 8 to 12. And I thought I would pay you, I don't know, but it's going to offer you $100 a video to review.
Okay, let's think about it.
Thinking about it. And just, yeah, they're all on my website. And you can do it, no rush. You can do it at your leisure. And just like for sensitivity, you know, I think it's a great thing. And I think it's a great thing Hay House is thinking this way, to look at each other, you know, like, huh. Well, that's nice. That's awfully white of you.
Right. I think that's a great idea. But let me meditate on it and think about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you so much, and I love your spirit. So I hope maybe I can interview you for my channel once your book comes out.
Yeah, let's do it. I love it. Let's keep in touch.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.